What's up, YouTube? Welcome to the latest episode of the Layup Line. My name is Dolos, and today I have a guest with me to talk about the Detroit Pistons and what they're going to do with the fifth overall pick. I have Bryce Hendricks here with me. He is a co-host of the Upside Swings podcast, and if you'll recall, I had his co-host partner Cooper Klein on the earlier episode to talk about the Houston Rockets. So I'm glad to be the first YouTube channel I think ever to get both guys of the Upside Swings podcast to make an appearance. So beat that. Bryce, how you doing?
I'm good. You're just one infinity upside swinger away from the whole gauntlet with Stone. So too bad the Lakers don't have a pick this year, or else he'd be. But no, I'm great, man, and I'm excited to be on. I found your channel through Coop, and I really loved that video. So I was very happy and blessed when you invited me on.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's insane. I got linked with Coop through Zay, who I had on the earlier episode, and then to find out Cooper's co-host, does work writing for the Pistons. I'm like, well, I already know who I'm going to be reaching out to for my Pistons episode. So I'm glad to have you. I'm going to dive right into this because I would really just love to get into contextualizing the roster that Detroit has. I let you know before we started recording that, I didn't get to catch many Pistons games just from living in Chicago. Those games ended up being blacked out. And, I felt like I was always missing things and, missing out on the rewatches. But, it felt like for first overall pick, who was touted as this generational guy, kind of consensus number one and comps to Luka, comps to, really high level players. We didn't really get to see much of Cade as far as media attention. I felt like he was never a discussion on ESPN talk shows. He didn't get brought up very much, and his numbers are extremely solid. So I just want your opinions to start with on Cade Cunningham in his year one.
I still think Cade is that guy, right? I still am very confident in everything I saw I mean, this is a guy who was a bit of a late bloomer, was in sort of the mainstream attention by the time he was 15, 16, but he really blew up his junior and senior year of high school. I mean, dominated FIBA, dominated at Montverde, dominated with the Texas Titans. And his game is not one that's super highlight friendly, right? There's a reason why Cade Cunningham was not all over overtime, right? He's not throwing down a ton of crazy dunks. His handle's very functional, but he's not. It's not like Luka's, where Luka can occasionally take a dude's ankles, right? But that's not really what Cade's doing. He's not the touch god of Luka either. I keep going back to Luka, but Luka hits some nutty tough shots, and Cade's not really that either. It's hard to make a highlight tape of man, this dude's proprioception just rules. No one sees the floor like him, and I still think that's there. Just like at Oklahoma State, did not play with the roster conducive to his specific skill set. Lots of awesome passes he made where they weren't converted. Lots of times you could see him thinking two steps ahead of his own teammates, and his teammates just weren't there. It's not that the team was super low feel or anything. It's just that a lot of guys who couldn't convert on shots. Cade was still coming back from injury, so he struggled to really create a ton of advantages. But I still think he is the ideal kind of build around piece because I think he's scalable. I think the upside is there for him to be the best guy. But I also think if he falls short of that, he's still a superstar secondary guy, right? His passing's still going to be there. I think the shooting's going to come around. I just think he's so moldable. He can play the 2 through the 4 basically in any lineup you build. Maybe even the nominal one in some ways, though he's never going to defend point guards, I wouldn't think. But there's just so much to like about Cade, and I still think he's the perfect build around piece for the Pistons to hopefully get back to championship contention in the near future.
Everything you said, I think it made me happy because one thing I did see and pay attention to was Cade did have a tale of 2 years and just, starting out with injury, The efficiency numbers weren't exactly where you want them to be, but as the year went on, like that obviously picked up and he got more used to playing in the NBA. He started making some adjustments and, those numbers started to pick up. And so where I'm really excited for year two is, a full healthy offseason and of development, of some training, what that year two is going to look like. But you also did bring up the fact, the teammates, that the depth wasn't exactly there for Detroit. So Jeremy Grant dealing with injury, he would have been, one of the better players to surround Cade with. And so he dealt with injuries. And then another guy I kind of really want to get to is Killian Hayes, because I'm super fascinated with him because high lottery pick. And, I think at the guard, you'd have some potential questions about his fit with Cade. So what are your thoughts on that pairing? Just in general, do you think Killian needs to be moved from the team for Cade to really thrive, or do you see a world where they can kind of coexist?
I think Killian is so fascinating, and he has been since his pre-draft season. He played at Ulm, and he was like their prize jewel. They like that club was like, we are going to make sure he's a lottery pick. They did everything
Mhm.
they can to make sure he would be a lottery pick, and it worked. And that's not to say he didn't have the talent to do that either. He did. He was very good, and I think he was a very worthwhile pick at 7. It might not be looked back on super fondly right now, but I think that was a weird draft with a lot of weird kind of stuff going into it. And I think he was a very solid pick at 7. It just hasn't quite worked out the way you wanted it to. This is really his first like healthy off season. And I think that's really important to note that he hasn't had a healthy off season. And when you're trying to adapt to running the point at the NBA, it's really nice to have those. I think the shot is a big question for some, but for me, the bigger issue is not even the shot. It's that he just kind of plays timid right now. Like he doesn't have a lot of belief in his ability to score. He's still a great passer, but when you don't put pressure on the rim, it's hard to be a great passer. And he doesn't trust himself to really get downhill and finish. And then the shot kind of is where it is, and that makes it tough for him to be like a 2 guard. So I think I still believe in Killian to some extent, at least. I think he can be a very, very high level backup with the potential for more. I think he can be a good defender. I think the passing is still really good, but if he doesn't figure out how to score, he can't start next to Cade. And you're at a point right now where you have that guy. You can't be worried about not drafting over Killian or signing or trading over Killian. Like if there's another point guard and you're like, that's our point guard, we have to go after him because that's the ceiling. You have to do that, and we'll probably get into that with options at 5. But you have to be willing to draft over him. But I also think that there's still a worthwhile player in Killian, and there's still a lot of upside there.
Okay. Well, there are, 3 other current roster players that I want to talk about before I get to the draft stuff. One of them being Sadiq Bey. He's the other like really young prospect that's on the team. I'm really fond of him just being a wing. I think defensively what he can provide, versatility wise. The shooting numbers for him, I think it was a weird shooting season. Off the top of my head, I don't exactly know what his efficiency numbers were, but I do believe it was a dip from year one. So I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are on Sadiq. Is he just a 3-and-D wing, or does he have the potential to be more?
Yeah, I mean, Sadiq's the one guy that you're like, other than K, that you're like confident is like a real NBA player on this team, right? Like,
Mhm.
well, I'm sure we'll talk about Isaiah Stewart in a second. We just talked about Killian Hayes. I'm not 100% confident saying that guy is an NBA player soon. Sadiq will be an NBA player for the next 5-6 years at the very least, if not longer. I think he just does a lot. He's 6'8" and he's strong. He's 215. He was kind of an older prospect, but he's also like he'll turn 20. He's 23 now, and this next year will be his age 23 season. He shot about 35% from 3 on pretty high volume this year, and there was definitely some exploring of the studio space going on with the shots he was taking. It's not like he shot 35% on 8 completely wide open threes a game.
Mhm.
He shot 35% on mostly contested threes and shots he probably shouldn't be taking, but I think it's important for him to take to feel what he can actually do. Because I mean, coming into this year, and I think some of it is Pistons fans trying to latch on to anything, but there were some guys like, oh man, can he be Chris Middleton? And I think this year we answered the question, because no, he cannot be Chris Middleton. That's not who he is. I think he can be a very, very good player, and I think he should be in the cards as a future starter here at the 3 or the 4. But I would not think if you want to compete, you should be giving him a super high usage. You want him to be Jay Crowder, Damari Carroll, not, you know, whatever a worse version of Chris Middleton. Like you don't want Sadiq Bey to eventually be what Jeremy Grant was this year and last year, where it's like, this is clearly a good player who's doing too much. You want him to be someone who can maybe do more when the time comes with him, but your ideal role is he's spotting up. He could take maybe some movement threes, occasionally attack a closeout, really, really give a shit on defense and work his way up there.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons that I really like him. I mean, 6'7", that versatility, we're seeing it in the playoffs. Like, players at his size are just so valuable in the NBA right now. As you mentioned, like I looked at those numbers, like 35% from three, like, and on the shot profile that he took, like I'll take that, because at the end of the day, like if you put him in a better team context and improve that shot quality, like you'd expect those numbers to go up. So that's generally the kind of player in the NBA that succeed. So I agree with your evaluation, where I see him as like a long-term piece to invest in, and wings can be pricey. And one of the kind of the comparisons that I had in mind was Mikal Bridges. You know, when we were just kind of talking about, could he be more? I know you kind of shot down that Chris Middleton comparison. You mentioned Jay Crowder, Damari Carroll. What do you think of, like, maybe can he get to Mikal Bridges' level of contribution on a successful team?
I think he could probably be a slightly better version of Mikal offensively. I'd be shocked to see him become the defensive playmaker that Mikal is. I mean, the level of athleticism difference is really, really it's just very different, right? Like Mikal is an uber athlete when it comes to lateral quickness and like closeout speed and the ability to flip his hips. Sadiq is a bit stiffer. I think that's where like Jay Crowder kind of came to mind, where it's like strong and stiff, you know, like he's a great defender, but it has to be the right matchups. For someone like Mikal, or I like to point out like OG and Anunoby, those are guys who it doesn't really matter who the matchup is. Like they can kind of just defend anyone, you know, like you're comfortable Mikal or OG, or you know, this year in the playoffs, like someone like a Jaylen Brown, even though he's not great, like you're comfortable with those guys switched on to Steph or whoever. If Sadiq is ever switched on to someone like that, you're going to be really, really worried, and you're going to have to account for that. But I think he can be a really nice kind of tertiary defender who just makes the right rotations. It can really fit in. But I don't see like that, like all defense upside that you have with guys like Mikal and OG.
I think that's a fair way to view things. Moving into like the next current roster guys that I want to talk about is Jeremy Grant. Just generally, I'm not really sure what his future is on the team. I know year one he gets to Detroit and it was like everyone is trying to trade for him, and like there are all these rumors of teams trying to acquire Jeremy Grant. And I felt like I was seeing a lot of Pistons fans like, oh no, like he's, you know, this fringe all-star. We're not giving him up. Give us all these picks and stuff. And it felt like this year, the tone was a lot more like, okay, we need to get Jeremy Grant off this team. You know, I'd like to see him traded. Let's get something in return for him. So can you kind of speak to like what that flip was, if I'm maybe reading that wrong? And just generally what Jeremy Grant's future is with the Detroit Pistons?
Yeah, I don't think it was that Jeremy got any worse. It's just that we kind of realized he's not the guy next to Cade we want, and he's kind of older, and he was good enough to win some games this year when he was healthy. And I kind of think maybe the Pistons don't want that, you know, like I like Jeremy Grant a lot. I think he's a very, very good player. I think in the right role, he does things really well. He kind of extended himself last year, and I think he while he didn't do it, he wasn't great at it. I think he proved he could be more than what he was in Denver, right? Like Denver, he was kind of he was their Kawhi stopper, and then he was kind of a cutter and off ball shooter. He can do a little more than that, but I don't know if Detroit's the place for him to do that right now. I think we have to be willing to lose out on him, and in hopes of finding potentially better fits with Cade, because right now I think your goal needs to be throw as many different archetypes next to Cade as you can and see what that looks like. You know what I mean? So like see what you'll kind of see what maybe a more ball dominant point guard in Killian looks like, or right now you have kind of a bet at a 3-and-D forward. So take a chance and see what like a real rim running big man looks like, or take a chance and see what an uber athlete point guard looks like, or another high volume scoring wing. Like take some other bets and see what's around there. I don't think what Jeremy Grant does is just super valuable here unless he's willing to take a step back and play. Like I really wish we would have seen him play a bit more as the role man this year. He just didn't do that. Like he just like not at all. He had no interest in being sort of a 4 in that way. And I think there's places where he really fits, like I think the dream would be you trade him to Portland for 7 and something, 7 and Josh Hart or something like that. Like that would be kind of the dream move. But I also think there's going to be a lot of buyers for that 7th pick. OG Anunoby supposedly on the move, maybe, or John Collins. Like I think a lot of people are like, oh, Portland was 7, so I don't know exactly what the move that the Blazers will make with that, but I think trying to get some draft capital, get off of him, get him to a team that I think he needs a specific fit, because like a great team isn't going to want him, but a team who is like, we have a usage hole you can fill, and we also need your defense and size. I mean, that's the Trailblazers to a T. I think maybe even the Nuggets if like Michael Porter Jr. is still not healthy, but I don't really see a big future for him on the Pistons, but I also could see this dragging out until the trade deadline.
Okay. Could I interest you in THT and Kendrick Nunn and some seconds instead for that?
I mean, probably not, but
okay.
I do like me some Talon Horton Tucker. So you're at least kind of speaking my language. That 2026 first, after LeBron retires and AD is bad, maybe that'll get us talking.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that THT comment. Just a little quick side tangent from the Pistons stuff. I am really upset with like kind of the just the role for him, like just forcing him to be a spot up guy. That's not what he does, and that made him look so much worse than he is as a player. And so that ended up like just unnecessary amounts of THT slander on the timeline during this season. So I'm glad you showed that moment of love there. Also, he's from Chicago, so I gotta love the guy.
Simeon, right? You went to Simeon.
Yep. You went to Simeon. Yeah. So
what a guy.
And then the final Pistons player that's on the roster I want to talk about got to be Beef Stew. Fantastic defensive player. He was super switchable during the season. I watch the playoffs now and I see Grant Williams and I'm like, I think Beef Stew can be comparable to that defensively. I think playing on the wing, really being helpful, like in help schemes and stuff like that. So, I think not Grant Williams. I think Beef Stew offensively, the development there, can he start to maybe hit some spot up jumpers from the corner, things like that? Can he, maybe kind of resemble a PJ Tucker of sorts? I think if he can, that becomes so valuable for Detroit next to Cade. And the kind of complaint was he's not necessarily a rim protector, but just I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are on Isaiah Stewart.
Yeah, I really love Isaiah Stewart as a potential playoff big, right? The regular season stuff is a bit more of a question because you kind of do need that rim protection in the regular season. It's hard to play a completely switch scheme. And right now, the Pistons don't really have the talent to switch everything either. They don't have like a great backside help four. They don't, they have good size if Killian's playing, but there's quite a few guys who like Sadiq switched on to smaller guards is kind of a trouble, and Killian on some wings is kind of an issue. Like they have to, be a bit more creative to really be a successful defense. I think coming in, he was a 5, right? And that was sort of the sell. But I actually really like what you mentioned with like PJ Tucker. Like I think that's actually more the end goal. Because right now, like he's just kind of not a good offensive player right now.
Mhm.
He's an all right passer for his role, but when this team is good, you don't want him getting high post touches. Um, can't really, I just not very like he's just not very athletic if we're being on like vertically. Like he's just not super
Mhm.
vertically explosive. And for someone who's only 6'8", despite his long arms, it's just hard to be a 5 and not be super vertically explosive. Early in his career, he got the Montrezl Harrell comps, and obviously very different vertical athletes. But I think the more I watch him, the more I'm with you on like PJ Tucker, or like a lesser version like an Ish Wainwright, like just like a bigger 4 who can be your change of pace 5 in the playoffs, who can be your closing 5. I think the switch defense, again, it's good for what it was. I do worry that he can still be hunted in the playoffs, but that's something we just haven't seen yet. I like teams are not going to be hunting, Isaiah Stewart in the regular season. There were too many other players on the Pistons they could hunt. But I'm interested to see how it holds up against higher leverage comp. He's someone who I think he could be really valuable. And I also think there's a world he's just not really a good NBA player, other than the fact that he's great in the locker room, awesome guy. And that probably helps him stick around. I mean, Wayne Ellington has been in the league for 10 years based mostly on that. So there's definitely something there, but deciding what level of defender he is and then just figuring out the shot to some extent. Those are kind of the two keys for Sadiq. And honestly, we probably won't know until probably that last year of his rookie contract, because it's still kind of up in the air.
I think we've done a great job of really summarizing some of like the key pieces of the roster. Before I move on to the draft, actually, I want to give you the floor to maybe see if I've missed anyone that you think might be important enough to kind of mention in this range here.
I mean, not really. Like if I wanted to talk about Saban Lee, like I could go. I could give you that. I like Saban Lee a lot. I think he's super athletic. The people actually, they probably want to hear a little bit about Marvin Bagley. I don't think Marvin Bagley's very good, if I'm being honest. He looked really good because the
Mhm.
Pistons just desperately needed the one thing he can do, which is rim run. But he's still a disaster on defense. He still doesn't really have an offensive game outside of catching alley oops. I think I think there's still a bit of like rose-colored glasses. Like just people just really want him to be good, and I
Mhm.
respect that. And he's good at his thing. I think maybe there's a role as sort of that backup big. But I've heard like he might actually get like a little paid this offseason. I hope it's not the Pistons kind of going out of their way to pay him, because I think what he does you can get in a better package. But other than that, I mean, not really. That's sort of like I think I mentioned to you in the preamble before we started recording, just like sort of the trouble with this team is that they have all these that like they're a bad team, but they're not like a fun bad team that has like a
Mhm.
ton of young dudes you can watch develop. It really was Cade and Sadiq, and then a little bit of Isaiah Stewart, and then a whole lot of just vets that weren't very good, or young guys that don't really have a future. Like I maybe Jamorko Pickett is okay down the line. Isaiah Livers rarely played this year. Not a huge Hami Diallo guy. It's just kind of it was just kind of a frustrating season that way, because it was made up of sort of bad role players, but not a ton of like upside young guy. Like at least the Thunder, like as miserable as they probably were to watch night in, night out, like they had Poku and they had Jeremiah Robinson Earl and Trey Mann and these guys who you could see the flashes and be like, oh man, maybe they're going to be really fun. This team didn't really have that outside of Cade.
Okay, well, I think you gave us a really great summary of what's currently on the roster and where Detroit is positioned. And with that kind of talent deficit that they're facing, they end up falling out of the top 3 and land with the 5th overall pick. In talent acquisition mode, obviously, best player available is what needs to be on their mind, but they do kind of end up landing where like all of the supposed franchise changing guys should be off the board by then. So with that in mind, like this is said to be a 3-player draft. Some have even stretched that out to 4 to include Jaden Ivey. At 5, what's really left for Detroit to do?
Yeah, so I definitely would extend that to 4, and I think a lot is gonna like be cruxed on how that top 3 shakes out, because I think the Pistons really want Jaden Ivey. There were a lot of rumors before the draft, and I've heard them substantiated by people I at least somewhat trust, that the Pistons were like about to take Jalen Green. Like Troy Weaver really loved Jalen Green, and they went Cade Cunningham, and I still believe that was the right choice. But they do love that athleticism. Troy Weaver was sort of that part of the Sam Presti regime on all those drafts. He was the guy who loved the athleticism, the length. He was the guy who got Terrence Ferguson and Darius Baisley and all that type of stuff. And we've kind of seen that, right? Like since he's left, Sam Presti's gone for the more cerebral guys like Giddy and Poku and such. So it's been kind of that shift. And I think Troy Weaver would really want Ivy. If it is a top 4, I think they might consider trying to move Jeremy Grant to the Kings just to move up 1. And I think that could happen if it's Ivy or Paolo at 4. So I think the top 2 is definitely going to be Chet and Jabari, right? I there's some obviously potential that Paolo sneaks in there, or even Ivy sneaks in there, but I think it's probably Chet and Jabari from everything I've seen at those top 2 spots.
Mm-hmm.
The Rockets are interesting. I really think the Rockets could take Jaden Ivey. And if that happens, I would be screaming and praying, hoping that the Pistons are willing to trade Grant, are willing to do what it takes to move up to 4 and take Paolo. I don't think that the Kings will be incredibly motivated to take Paolo. I do think the Kings might be. If Ivy's there, they might be tougher to convince. I think that fit just seems a little easier. Like Ivy Fox next to Sabonis seems a little easier than getting Paolo in there. If everyone's gone and they're still at 5, if Ivy's gone, Keegan Murray seems like an obvious choice. He's like he's the guy who's going to be linked here a lot. And I get that. And I also think it should be noted that if they don't move up to 4, I think they could move into 7. So you could be talking about any of these, of 2 of the next couple of guys I'll mention. I think Adrian Griffin Jr. could be in play, probably more at 7 than at 5. Like someone like, it's hard to say where Shaedon Sharp's range is. It feels like it's fallen off, but he could be in play. Jalen Duren is a name I'm really in on. I think he would really make a huge difference here again, filling that rim runner role with a bit more defense and upside. And then I think Dyson Daniels deserves mention here. Not necessarily my guy, but someone who has really risen up boards. And it just feels like teams are desperate for anything they can squint and call a creator in this draft. And that kind of is Daniels. Like he's not really a point guard, but he is kind of a point guard because he passes, and he's also 6'7". He's not a bad athlete. We think he can shoot. I think he's going to get real play as high as maybe not 5. Like 5 might be a slight stretch, but there's a chance he ends up like in Indiana, or if he doesn't get drafted by Indiana and the Pistons trade into 7, I could see Dyson being in play there. So there's a lot of different ways this can go. I really hope they somehow end up with Duren, and then other than that, I could kind of go either way. You know, Adrian Griffith Jr. I like a lot. Johnny Davis seems like he's not in this range anymore. Kind of seems like he's fallen a little bit, but he's someone who's really fun. Keegan Murray, I feel like is the most likely at 5. Like I just think that's kind of the odds-on favorite. He's super safe. He's 6'8". You know, he's kind of like a slightly more athletic Sadiq Bey. You know, so you're at least stacking that front court with defense and versatility. I think if you take Keegan, you are putting a lot on Cade to be just the guy, because there's like zero creator upside with Keegan, but he is going to be a really good defender. He can definitely shoot. He's athletic. I think he can, you know, do a little bit of slashing. So there's at least something there. I wouldn't hate that pick. So it really feels like I think that the upside comes in potentially trading to 4 and getting one of Ivy or Paolo.
Yeah, I think really just looking at the draft, like I've been emphasizing this in every episode. I'm not a draft guy myself, but just kind of looking at people whose draft opinion I trust, what they're saying. That top four, like I'd be really bummed to be sitting at the end of that and like all the most exciting prospects are gone, and you're kind of like, all right, well now who do we take? Because best player available is not very clear after four, like you said. I kind of have some concerns about Keegan Murray after talking with my last guest on the Kings episode. He kind of wanted Sacramento to stay far away from Murray, just like as one of the bigger selling points of his game, being a post scorer, like that not really being something he values is translatable in the NBA. And for a wing, just wanting him to have like a larger skill set in range there. I think just from that opinion, I think I might also kind of share the same views on not wanting Detroit to take him either. Just are looking for more upside because as we've gone through the roster, like they need to try and find talent there. So I think if I were a Pistons fan, like fingers crossed, I'm begging and praying that they trade up and make that Jaden Ivey thing possible, because I think that is such a perfect blend of fit and getting a really good player for a top four or top five range.
Yeah, I think both Ivy and Paolo are the dreams for me because they are bets at secondary shot creators. I love Cade. I think he's really good. I
Mhm.
don't necessarily want Cade to be Luca, right? Where it's like Luca has to have like a 36% usage every night, or the Mavs just like aren't like they're just not good enough. I would change it a little bit this year with the addition of Spencer Dinwiddie, but like I don't think Cade needs to be a heliocentric creator. I think he works a lot better as someone who does a lot of the setup and is your go-to guy, but has other release valves next to him. I think Ivy can really do that. He's super athletic. He'd actually make this team run in transition, which I think is huge. And then Paolo is a bit different, but I think he can really do that. I think it goes underrated that Paolo is just straight up the best shot maker in this class. Like I think over Jabari Smith comfortably for me, just in terms of the versatility on that shot, his ability to create good looks. And then on top of that, he's a really good passer. I think you'd be getting like in two straight drafts, in my opinion, you'd basically be getting the best passer. Cade, I thought was clear, far and away the best passer last year. And I think there's a real argument that Paolo is the best passer in this class, partially because of the issues with the rest of the class not having many guards, but also partially just because he's a really, really good passer at 6'10", who has the handle and athleticism to access those passes. So Paolo's like my dream fit. Like somehow, some way get Paolo, but I'd love Ivy too, because again, just taking that bet as someone else who can get a bucket when need be, who can create an advantage and make some plays for others. I think Ivy next to Cade is ideal for him too, because I don't want to see Ivy in a situation where he has to be the point guard. I like Ivy more as an attacking two guard who plays in the pick and roll when it makes sense for him, but is usually kind of attacking tilted floors, always on the move. You take advantage of his athleticism and you can mitigate his sort of decision making issues. So those are the two like absolutely ideal fits for me.
I'm absolutely happy to keep this trend going, because this is going to be like the fifth straight episode where I brought a guest on, and it's just been like the Paolo hype fest, because I'm getting more and more sold on him by the day. And I'm at the point of just really confused why he isn't more heavily discussed as being the first overall pick. Just going through his tape and just watching more often, like the talent is obvious. I think the passing, his feel is really great. I think he has it on dump offs, and with his rim pressure, those are going to be there so frequently. I love the term release valve, because that is exactly what Detroit needs there with Cade, someone who can take some pressure off of him, just like other ball movers, like other ball handlers, somebody who can attack a closeout and really put pressure on the rim and force help. And Paolo fits that perfectly. And each episode I've kind of like found myself, talking, like not really expecting him to be there. Like, I did the Magic episode, I did the OKC episode, and then I'm kind of like, okay, I don't really expect him to be there for Houston, but like the mocks seem to kind of just have him falling there. So I'm really fascinated by that. If Detroit could potentially get the guy I think is the best player in the draft at 4 or at 5, like that would be absolutely insane to land. And executive of the year might be might be waiting for Troy Weaver for that one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think any way possible. I think there is a world he slips to 5. I really could see the Rockets take Ivy, and then the Kings are like, well, we actually don't really like Paolo. Like, we don't like Paolo's fit with Sabonis because the Kings are kind of the Kings. And
Mhm.
I've heard a lot that they are potentially shopping for, that
Yeah.
they don't they're very focused on fit. Maybe they go Keegan Murray, and then suddenly at 5 you have who I consider to be the best player in the draft, and who I think is the perfect fit next to Cade. And I think you're talking about a real, I mean, I think that's an all-star duo in Cade and Paolo. And I think it's the right type of all-star duo where it's high field wings who can compete on both ends and really raise the ceiling of your offense while not being liabilities on defense. So I think that would be a major, major win to grab Paolo.
Yeah. Well, now that we've talked, like, really the best case scenario is trading up, getting somebody that's in that top 4. I do want to, like, maybe set some realistic expectations of that doesn't happen, because if, these really are 4 generational prospects, those are hard to get teams to trade out of. So there is a world where Detroit is stuck at 5 and they maybe have to look elsewhere. So you've already mentioned Jalen Duren as someone you think you'd love to acquire in this draft. I've generally, as a philosophy, been a little more skeptical about taking bigs of his profile like this high in the draft, just because I think if your build is a rim running big, and I think you can find that in free agency for relatively low cost. And so getting that in, a top 5 pick, like I'm really shooting for upside. But is there something with Thurin that I'm missing that, or just, maybe you think my philosophy's off and Durin is absolutely worth taking with the 5th overall pick?
I'm definitely with you generally philosophy wise, right? Like, and it shows, in my board this year in our pod, like we talked about like Mark Williams earlier in the year, and Christian Coloco. And I liked Coloco. He'd probably be like a late first for me just based on the fact that this draft is pretty poor. But like I'm lower on Williams than ever. Williams is getting lottery buzz. I'm going to have him in my 40s probably. I'm generally with you. I think Durant is a particularly potent mix of strength, feel, and vertical athleticism. He is, I mean, he's probably the third best athlete in this class behind Ivy and Tari Eason, in my opinion. I think that he's an insane vertical athlete. He's very, very fast in the open court. I mean, he's probably only like 6'8", but he's got long arms. Excuse me. I just think that the sell is that he is maybe that special defender. And he might not reach that if we're being honest. Like, he might not be that top end outcome guy, but he is easily the best bet for me to be that type of player, of basically any of the rim running bigs in the past couple of years, more so than someone like Jackson Hayes, who went top 10. I think that was 2 years ago. I just think that Duren is, if you go back and watch, like the Memphis context was weird, right? They had no spacing. He was always playing with another big. Very little pick and roll ever run. And if it was pick and roll run, it was lots of times guys who couldn't get him passes in the right spot. If you go back and watch Montverde tape, or he played with, I believe, Team Final in EYBL, you can really see that sort of unlocked a little bit with just playing with players who can make plays. And the defense, I think, is potentially really special. His understanding for like the pick and roll and just how to defend the pick and roll is really, really special for someone of his athletic profile. And super quick leaper. Like I said, the long arms, good feel for high pointing blocks. He might not be like a defensive player of the year, but I think he could be a potential defensive game changer. And he's fairly mobile. I mean, I've always said switch 1 through 5 is kind of a bad phrase because there's like 4 people who do that. But I think he is potentially scheme versatile, even if it's not like Bam Adebayo level movement stuff. So I think he's all right at 5. I wouldn't be like jumping up and down super happy or anything, but I think it would be a really solid pick. And I like the process behind it a lot because for me, I mean, like I have a tier of like 4 through 10 that of guys I like, but a lot of those guys, I mean, Kendall Brown, Blake Wesley, and Tari Eason and Johnny Davis are not really guys who are going to be taken this high, you know? So it's kind of like out of the guys I think are going to go this high, it's Jalen Duren and Johnny Davis that I really like, and I'd be happy with either of them. I think Duren is a really solid pick. I don't know if he's an all-star. I think there's like you can maybe see that, but I'd really like just the process there, and understanding his fit next to Cade is really good, and that he increases your upside, and also that it means that you're not thinking too much about someone like Isaiah Stewart, right? You're not like, well, we can't draft Jalen Duren because we have Isaiah Stewart. And I think that would be good going forward because next year's class, if they're bad again, as they probably will be and should be, you're really going to have to make some tough decisions. You know, like if you're at 3 and it's like Dariq Whitehead, well, you can't be thinking too much about Sadiq Bey, right? You can't be thinking too much about Isaiah Stewart if Khalil Ware's there or whatever. So I think it'd be good process to show that they're just kind of picking for what matters most, which is building around Cade, and not picking for, well, how does this person fit with our entire roster? How does this person slot in to give us immediate contributions and what it looks like next year, and then building from there? No, it's more of a holistic picture of we need to build a championship team with Cade as our best player. What does that look like? And I think Duren is probably the best bet at 5 to at least make me confident that they're doing that.
I'm happy to talk about Duren because my previous guest, Dimitri Kang's draft, he had him pretty high on his big board as well, which made me look into him some more as well, doing some tape watch on him. Man, but like you said, I think he is scheme versatile. I think he can hold up in some switches. One thing I kind of hate about watching college tape is like I can watch somebody like lock someone up, but I have no context for who they locked up. Like maybe the guy he just played great defense on was a scrub. But at the end of the day, like Duren, I think the size on top of his youth with that frame, I would be willing to kind of bend my policy a little bit for a guy who can maybe project to be a little bit like Rob Williams, because Rob Williams is another guy who was I think pre-draft was getting lottery buzz, and for whatever off the court quote unquote reasons fell to a late first. And if we do a redraft, he's going way higher than where he was slotted. So if you can get value like that, I think that's kind of like the realistic, maybe not realistic, but like optimistic viewpoint on Duren. Like if he can become Rob Williams, that's worth that top 5 pick there, and that would be a fantastic fit with what Detroit like needs, and like just a talent add, because we've already talked about what Marvin Bagley brought, just because he was able to be a rim runner, and so that's a skill that roster would need in pick and roll. So I'd love Duren there if those other guys are off the board at that point. Is there, you mentioned Johnny Davis as well, which is interesting because, my previous guest, he was actually pretty low on him. Wasn't all that fond of him, and that's what I kind of love about this area in the draft, where everything is super subjective, because it's feel, it's different evaluators value different things as far as play styles, and so what do you see in Johnny Davis that has you more of a fan of him?
I think he is kind of miscast by some as like a high volume scorer type. And I think there's maybe that like upside there, but I don't think that's necessarily what he has to be. He had to be that guy for Wisconsin. Wisconsin was a horrible offensive context for him because they had no shooting. They didn't have good roll men. It was basically a lot of Johnny Davis, can you please score in isolation? And he did that really well until he got injured. I think the first step is elite, even though it's not as good out of like moves. So like he's not great running a pick and roll to get downhill, but if he catches and he's attacking off the catch, it's nasty. I mean, he's just absolutely dusting guys getting right to the rim. I think that's the perfect like guy next to another creator. So, you know, I think Cade breaks the defense down, passes to Johnny Davis. I think he's a good enough shooter that you have to close out or you have to be there, and he's just blowing by you and he's keeping that momentum going. Really underrated passer, in my opinion. Again, played with no shooters and bad roll men. So it's hard to, you know, it's hard to really point to assist numbers. Like he had like a poor assist to turnover, but if you watch the tape, I mean, he could throw comfortably basically any pass in the book with both hands. He had his moments where he's just like he gets tunnel vision and he was going to score, but I don't think that's like who he is as a player. I think he's a much more kind of cerebral guy than that, and it reminds me a lot actually. If you go back and watch Marcus Smart tape at Oklahoma State, I think there's like some sneaky similarities there with how they played offensively. Where I think Marcus Smart is a super underrated passer, super underrated athlete. You know, struggles to shoot, and I think there's going to be some early career foibles with Davis's shot. I think it needs some work, but I think he can get there. And I just think Davis's defense is potentially like game changing. I think he is far and away the best perimeter defender in this class, aside from maybe Tari Eason, but Eason's a little different, right? It's like Eason's the playmaker, like off ball playmaker type. Davis is like the point of attack god. Like he is someone who he gets through screens, great hands, super strong, super quick. I think he's versatile. I think he can guard most ones and most threes. Like I think you could put him on, you know, obviously like someone like LeBron is going to get his right, but I think he could give LeBron as much a run for his money as anyone in the league, or Zach LaVine on a given night as much, you know, as tough a night as he can, as someone like Zach LaVine can really have. So I think there's that. I just think again, so you know, you mentioned like those top four. For some, for me, it's three. Those top three guys are like, okay, those are the guys who are changing your franchise, who are making something really sing, who can potentially come in and be the guy in some worlds. It's that next tier where I'm like, okay, which of these guys, you know, really fit, really go well next to other creators, have the upside to do specific things at a very valuable level. So to me, that's defense, or maybe it's, you know, like the first step, like I mentioned with Johnny, being able to attack closeouts and occasionally run pick and rolls. It's just like, how can they contribute to winning? So, you know, Duran falls into that for me with his potential scheme versatility and how he can unlock things in the pick and roll as a roll man. And then for Davis, it's sort of that defense mixed with being able to do just enough offensively. I think he'll scale down from what he did to a smaller role very nicely. He's big, he's strong. I just think that, yeah, I think Davis gets really underrated. He's gotten really overlooked in this pre-draft process, and I absolutely love him in Detroit.
You know, there are two names that you know, actually one of them we have mentioned, Shaedon Sharpe, but if there are two names that I'm just going to lump in together here, Shaedon Sharpe and Benedict Mathurin. I'm curious what your thoughts on them are. They were mentioned in my previous video on the big board. So I just kind of want to see where they rank for you. I know, like you mentioned, Sharpe has been falling in pre-draft stuff. There was the drama about him leaving workouts and stuff like that. And obviously he didn't play at college at all. So we really don't have all that much to go off of with him. So I think he'd be a risk for Detroit to take, but I do want to mention him just because if the talent is what was initially projected, he could fit the billing of best overall at 5 with the rest of those guys off the board. So I just want to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so for me, I think there's a major disconnect between how I see Shaedon and how the people who are high on Shaedon see Shaedon. I don't think that he's really that type of secondary creator. I actually think his offensive game is way more similar to Benedict Mathurin than it is to like Jaden Ivey. I think people kind of bill him as like an elite athlete shot creator, and I just don't think it's what he is. He's a very, very awesome vertical athlete. He gets up for cool dunks. He can explode off one or two. But the burst kind of the downhill driving, it's not there on tape. I mean, you go and you watch him at Sunrise Christian or not Sunrise Christian, Dream City, excuse me, or you watch him, with his EYBL team, and you can see stuff with like I think those are very valuable scouting contexts. Like it's not all just college basketball or nothing, because those contexts tend to have a lot less of the oh, this guy was just perfect in the scheme, or the scheme didn't fit this guy, than something like college basketball. We talked about Duran hurt by college, but like you go back and you watch his high school tape and you see more what his NBA role is. I think that's a little bit with Shaedon Sharpe, and it's not promising. Like I think his main source of offense is tough, like hitting dribble moves and the tough threes. And I just don't think that's something that is super valuable unless it hits like a super, super high end outcome, right? You have to be so good at that for that to be your main source of offense. The only guys I can think of are, Anthony Simons, but even Simons gets to the rim a ton. Simons is an elite downhill driver too, super underrated part of his game, that he can get on top of the rim in a hurry. That's not Shaedon Sharpe. I think Shaedon Sharpe has some real issues with kind of lower body locomotion in terms of how he gets himself going. He's just not very fast, and the defense is really bad. Maybe that can fix itself, but I just think like if we would have seen Shaedon Sharpe in a year at college, we're not talking about him at 5, in my opinion. I think we're talking about him more at the 15 range. And at 15, okay, I can buy that. I'm not super high on it, but like at a certain point, especially in this, usually that point for me is like in the 20s. In this draft, that point for me is like 16. Past like 16, okay, you want to take that risk on Shaedon Sharpe, that's fine. But at 5, I think you'd be passing up way too many more obvious talents. I just don't think. I think a lot of the sell with Sharpe is kind of people who don't watch a ton of high school film, if I'm being honest. And for me, as someone who does watch a lot of high school stuff, who covers the EYBL really closely at times, and is constantly seeing guys kind of exposed in that context, I think what I've seen from Shaedon is not super promising. I think there's just a lot of worry for me there. So I would be really disappointed if he was the pick at 5. I think he can be a fine player because I think he can really shoot. I think he can be an all right cutter. And I think he can eventually create some shots for himself from deep, for what that's worth. But I think he's a lot closer to like Grayson Allen than he is like, Dame Lillard or something like that. As crazy as that might sound. But that's kind of, I think that's more his role than sort of secondary shot creator. And no one's happy with sort of an off-ball shooter who can occasionally put the ball on the ground at 5 when you could be getting more valuable pieces.
The entire Shaedon Sharpe experience for me has been like super wild because as like a non-draft person, I don't really tune into like anything that's happening with prospects until draft lottery night. And so like I think I start paying attention to draft stuff on lottery night. And Sharpe is still relatively projected high at that point. And so at that point, like I'm still kind of putting him on thumbnails, writing him into outlines for questions I'm going to ask with guests. And then over the course of like workouts and everything like that, he's rapidly falling to like late in the lottery. And I'm like, wow, I gotta get these Shaedon Sharpe questions out of here. And I've had to take them off thumbnails and stuff. So that's been a wild experience. And I kind of get where you're at with, maybe not being as high on like the best outcome for him, and just at 5 where you do still want to take best player available, there's still some other guys with upside that you can grab here that, maybe more realistically hit their outcomes. But, the other guy that I did want to hit on paired with him was Mathurin. You did kind of also mention him a bit with that, but just, maybe dive into his offensive game a bit more.
Yeah, I like Mathurin. I think Mathurin is super limited in terms of like upside stuff, right? Like I think he's the best bet in this class to be like a movement shooter, and I think that's worth something. I mean, we've seen the value of just someone who can really occupy a defense with how they move away from the ball. I think his cutting is really nice. He has moments as a passer. The issue is he can't dribble, and I don't think he's ever going to be able to dribble because his problem specifically is that he just like doesn't have a good like handle on the ball. So like the footwork is good. the shift in the hips is iffy. It's not great, but he can do some things there. He has quick enough hips, but he just like doesn't have. I don't know if he has like tiny hands or what it is. Maybe it's the long arms getting in the way, or but like his specific handle issue is just not one you see fixed often. And I just think that I'd be shocked if he's ever actually that secondary creator, right? I think he's a lot more of an off-ball scorer, which has value. I think that can be really valuable. He's a guy at 5 who I wouldn't hate, right? Like I think it'd be a bit of a reach, but I think I can squint and see. Like I think Benedict Mathurin at the very least is an NBA player. Like I have very few doubts that he will play in the NBA and provide value as a movement shooter, as a cutter. He tries on defense. He's a hard worker from everything I've heard. Awesome athlete, obviously. I think he's probably a good bet to be a starting or like sixth man type two guard. I think that has value. I think he's a little boosted by just how bad this class is, especially it's super weak at the wings. I mean, some of the guys we're talking about as wings, I was kind of realizing this doing some research today, super small. I mean, like Jalen Williams from Santa Clara, who I really like, 6'4.5", and we're calling him like a 3 in this class. You look back at past classes, and usually threes are at least 6'5", pushing 6'6" without shoes. In this class, they're all really small, and I think that kind of speaks to how just generally kind of low level the talent is in this class when you get to the depth of it. But I think Mathurin is good. Like he's just a good player. I just don't know what the upside is. But at a certain point, especially again, if your plan is to be bad next year, where basically the entire top 7, maybe even 8 guys to me look like, I mean, like real potential high level impact all-star types, then I don't hate taking Mathurin and then betting on getting a top, wing big guard from next year, however that might look. So I don't hate Mathurin. I think he's perfectly fine, can really shoot, can really dunk the ball. And other than that, I think the offensive game is kind of lacking. And I don't think the defense is elite. It's good. I don't think it's like, Johnny Davis game breaking good.
Yeah. Well, I love the way that we've really forecasted this draft for the Detroit Pistons fans, because it boils down to really fingers crossed and praying that you can somehow trade up and get one of the guys that can make a impact difference on this franchise. And outside of that, it's really just hoping that the front office, the coaching staff have really done their homework on, player health in the draft. Because AJ Griffin, if he's healthy, I think could also be in play. We didn't get to him as much. They really do their homework on really who the best player available is, and that they're confident in this pick. We've also talked through the processing things of like, don't let anyone currently on the roster outside of Cade impact like what this draft decision is. So now that we've really outlined what the draft looks like, I mean, outside of, I think there's a late second round pick that we don't really need to get into. I think we've outlined what the draft looks like for Detroit. What does the perfect ideal Pistons offseason look like for you?
I mean, it would involve trading Jeremy Grant, I'm fine trading up. If you trade for 7, I'd also be happy with that. Just getting him kind of somewhere where he can be of more usefulness and we can get some value. If you could get 7 and Simons, I'd be really happy. Like I love Simons and I love him next to Cade. So if you could walk out of this draft, losing Jeremy Grant and getting Duran, Adrian Griffin, and Simons, I'd be super happy. I think that's kind of super rose tinted glasses, but I think that'd be a great outcome. Other than that, I don't have like a ton. I really hope we don't offer DeAndre Ayton like a huge contract. I don't want DeAndre on a max. I think he's a very good player. I don't want him on the max with where he's at in his development curve. I think he'll make us too good too fast, and I don't think he's good enough to justify that. There's some. I mean, there's some like free agents, but I'd be pretty happy to just sort of take bets on young guys, maybe buy another second rounder, get another young guy with some upside, or the Spurs and I think the Grizzlies both have 3 first-round picks. Like I'm sure one of those could be fairly easy to acquire. Like get some young talent in here that's fun to watch. Like take some swings. I think we've been super safe in the draft. I think, last year we went Isaiah Livers at 44, I think, or 46, something like that. And I'm like, okay, that's a fine pick. I think he's a good player, but there's no upside there, right? Like at best, he is sort of a low level starting 4 3 and D type. And in most outcomes, he's sort of someone you don't ever really want to have to go to in a playoff situation. I think there's higher upside guys you could maybe grab in the second round or in the mid first. I'd love that. But there's honestly like not a ton of free agent targets for me. Like I mentioned DeAndre Ayton doesn't really do it for me. There's like no point guards. I'd love Ricky Rubio if he was healthy, just because I love Ricky Rubio as a player. Beal is obviously not someone we're super interested in. I don't really know. I'm kind of at I don't even know with this offseason. I don't know what exactly we're gonna do. I just think that I just want to be young, just be young and be really bad, because that 2023 draft is awesome. Just get one of those guys. There's not a ton of guys I'm dying to grab in this year's. Maybe like a restricted free agent offer at Miles Bridges, I'd be down on. I'd really love Miles Bridges here. Malik Monk, maybe I'd like him, I guess, but like that's what I mean. Like I'm already getting into Malik Monk. I think that tells you just how sort of weak this offseason is in terms of free agents, and just that I hope they're bad. Like just be really bad, be fun, let Cade be the guy for a year and see how it goes, and next year have a good pick and end up with one of Scoot, the Thompson twins, Derek, Wemby, Cam Whitmore. I mean, all these guys, any of the Arkansas guys, like just whoever. Next year's draft is so loaded. Getting in the race for one of those top 3 4 picks is huge. And I think the Pistons are primed to be that bad. And I just hope they buy into it and do it, rather than bringing in Ayton and trying to put together a squad that makes some sense and chase, the 10th seed so they can make the play in. Like, don't do that. Just be really bad.
Yeah, that has also been a theme of these episodes. Really trying to rush a rebuild ends up making it take longer, because you end up at that stage where you're just this mediocre team and you're not ever getting like a game-changing draft pick, and you're not ever really contending for anything in the playoffs. And that's somewhere Detroit has been. And one of the first things, one of the first quotes that I saw from the new GM when he came in was that he really wanted to restore the Pistons, and that kind of made me look at Detroit in a different context, because it reminded me of really how affected the Pistons have been by recency bias, in that this is a franchise with generally more prestige than a lot of like current or modern franchises, and they're really kind of looked at as like this garbage, an underachieving team and whatnot. And so I would really love for this rebuild to play out in a way that Detroit's not just mediocre and middling, because they do have an extremely exciting star and centerpiece in Cade. And I'd like to see them take their time with this rebuild. And so I'm right there with you, and move Jeremy Grant to somewhere he can be in a more helpful context for that team. You can get some assets that put you, maybe on a younger timeline that fits Cade better. You can also really just commit to losing more, be a bit more blatant about it if you need to, because like you mentioned, next year's draft is, you want to be at the top. You don't want to take any chances of being the team that falls out. So I'd love that for Detroit. The last kind of question that I want to leave this with is, last question as far as like franchise stuff. What about the coaching here? I don't think I saw very much talk about Dwayne Casey and the job he's performed. He's also really a holdover from a previous regime, so it feels inevitable that he will be replaced at some point. But I also kind of feel like I've seen players on the Pistons, some team like really seem to like him and vouch for him. So, I mean, maybe what are your thoughts there?
think there's a lot of belief that Casey's like a really good development guy. For what that's worth, I don't love how he runs his offense. If I'm being honest, I think Cade needs to be in a creative offense, in an offense that's going to do some interesting things because he can process at such a high level but he can process at such a high level, but he's not like Trey Young, or you can just run high pick and roll and he's going to create an advantage every time. He needs like a bit of a higher, he needs more interesting stuff to be going on for him to create advantages, but then he can process even harder looks than if you were just running straight pick and rolls, if that makes sense. So I think he's eventually going to have to be moved on from, but he seems super bought into this rebuild. I've heard everyone loves him. I mean, we've heard basically zero about conflict or players not getting along, which happens lots of times with teams that are losing all the time, right? Like teams don't like each other when they're bad all the time. And resentment kind of brews from that. And then it carries over to when they get good. I think that's kind of what we saw with the Celtics under Brad Stevens before they move on to Ime Udoka and now they're in the championship. The issue with Brad Stevens wasn't his X's and O's. It was that he struggled to manage personalities. He brought in someone to do that who's also good at X's and O's, and suddenly they're in the finals and they might win it all for all we know. And I think that's not happening with Casey. So I think that's good. But I think eventually it's something's going to have to give. And I just don't know if he's the guy. Like he strikes me as the guy who's always going to be there right before a team gets really good. Like he is the slightly better version of Mark Jackson, where it's like, he was with the Raptors and then he leaves and they get a ring. And it's, of course, they got Kawhi too, but I think a lot of that was Masai realized they need someone who's going to be more creative. And I think that's going to happen again. He's great at development. He's great at putting guys in good spots. Everyone loves him. Eventually, we're going to realize we have to be more creative. We can't run basic offense, basic defense, and win. That's not how our talent works. So I think eventually that's going to give, but I'm in no rush to see Casey out the door. We're not going to be good. It's not like he's like there's some pressure here. Let him Brett Brown it for a little bit. And then if he can't do it when the going gets tough, then you look to move on and your players will probably understand at that point. But right now it feels pretty much superfluous because the team is going to be and should be bad either way.
Yeah, I really only, brought up that last question just because I feel like there are so many like interesting coaching candidates that are out on the market. And with all of these, high profile assistants being snatched up, I was just curious, maybe Detroit tries to get in on that game. But I guess they probably would have done that by now if Casey was going to be moved on from this offseason. So, right there with you as far as, keep him around, let him Brett Brown it. So I've loved our Pistons talk. Like I said, I think we did a really good job, like forecasting the draft, where Detroit wants to be, also just contextualizing this roster and where they are as a franchise, the future outlook and everything. Just to wrap it up, I want to give you the floor one more time because, I'm aware that you do fantastic work on the podcast, Upside Swings. Is there, other platforms, other things that you're working on where people can go find your work and go support the things that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean the big thing is Upside Swings. We've really built that up, and it's been another big year. We're doing individual team previews for every team, so still grinding through those. But the draft is almost here. It's kind of surreal. But yeah, that's the main. I mean, that's the main source of my work. I write for Kook Center. If you're interested in college basketball, I cover a lot of X's and O's stuff over there. So if you're interested in kind of, I don't want to say learning. That sounds almost condescending, but like if you're interested in kind of just getting a more X's and O's perspective of what's going on in college with how they run actions and how they're building college teams, I think that's a good resource, even if you're not a Kook fan, which most of you probably aren't. If we're being honest, it's a fairly small for a Power 5 school. And then you can at Bryce Hendrick14 find most of my stuff. I have a Patreon. All my stuff on there is free. You can donate if you want, but I don't believe about like locking my work behind a paywall. I'll put out my big board on there, and basically the day of the draft is when I'll finally be done. So that shows you I really go until the last minute there. But Yeah, that's where you can find all my stuff. And I'll do EYBL writing on that Patreon too. But this has been great. I've loved talking the Pistons. I don't get to do it much.
Mhm.
People don't often think of me as a Pistons expert, but I had a blast, and I'm a huge fan of your work. I think you do a lot of great stuff with this YouTube channel, and I love the episode you did with Coop, and he had nothing but glowing reviews. You reached out to me and I asked, like, what do you think going on? Do you have a good time? He's like, oh yeah, like he's right up our alley. So big fan, and thank you so much for having me.
I appreciate the cosign, and in return, I cannot say enough great things about like your podcast and the work you guys do. I think it's fantastic. Like the Detroit episode that you guys did for Upside Swings, I went and listened to that before doing this recording, and I think that gave me a lot of context for some of the things that I wanted to ask and maybe get a little bit more from you on. So I cannot say enough about it. I think everyone that's listening to this should go listen to your podcast, go subscribe to it, because you guys are doing all 30 teams for your draft preview. So if you like this series on the channel, you're absolutely gonna love Upside Swings. Also, I saw that like you guys are on TikTok, and TikTok's I've been getting into it, so I enjoyed that. I plugged that, like, literally go support everything that Bryce and Cooper doing, because they know ball, and I think they're super entertaining and fun with their perspective. So that's that. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching this episode. If you're on YouTube enjoying this, go ahead and like it, subscribe, do all the things that get the YouTube algorithm going, and enjoy the rest of your day.